Hello and welcome to Money, Money, Money. I'm Sumaira Abidi. As India celebrates 75 years of independence, CNBC-TV18 has pledged to conduct a month-long awareness program on importance of long-term financial planning and wealth creation. Today, we focus on those who are just getting started in their careers. Savvy young Indians in their 20s and 30s have been flocking to the stock market in droves over the last 2 years. But as exciting as the stock market may sound, it is equally, if not more important for these millennials to have a holistic financial plan which is linked to their goals so that any downturn does not upset the apple cart. Joining in this endeavor is Vishal Dhawan of Plan Ahead Wealth Advisors, who will talk about getting started, especially for those in their late 20s and early 30s. Vishal, thanks very much for joining in. You know, often the biggest hurdle for financial planning, I don't mean just, investing randomly, is getting started, right? So let's start with somebody who's got their first salary. Should investing discipline start here? I mean, the first paycheck itself, or is it more like, let me enjoy my first few salaries? I can do it from the 6th month, the second year onwards, or should it be the very first paycheck?
Thanks, Sumaira, for having me over. So I clearly believe that, saving and investing is a lot like starting a diet plan. I think you always want to postpone it to a later point. And very often when you're starting your career, this tends to be driven by 2 or 3 different things. One is you just you haven't had the freedom so far to be able to spend in the way that you wanted to. You had controls put by parents, maybe by siblings, and you just want to go out and spend on things that you wanted to spend on, maybe an electronic gadget, maybe maybe entertainment. So there's lots of sort of unfulfilled desires that you want to take care of. The second is just the plethora of options. There are so many things that you can buy into when you want to start investing, that sometimes it just creates confusion because you have too many choices. Should you buy a mutual fund? Should you do in the stock market? Everyone around you is giving you some advice. There's a friendly insurance agent telling you what to do. So it's really complex. And very clearly, we don't have a lot of financial literacy as a part of our college programs, school programs, etc. So very clearly, when you come in there, you get confused, and therefore you tend to defer these decisions. The third thing very clearly that we find is that it's very difficult for a lot of people to sit down when they're young and define financial goals. And we think this is actually the best starting point, because what you want to do is figure out what you want to use your money for. Is it going to be to upgrade your education because you need a master's to go forward in your career? Is it going to be that you need to help your parents pay down a loan because your parents are reaching their retirement phase? Is it that you want to save towards your own objectives of maybe becoming an entrepreneur in a few years? So I think the moment you start to define goals, I think it becomes much easier to build your investment strategy as a result of that. Okay. Last but not the least, don't forget about the fact that investing is different from savings. I think a lot of times these two things get confused, and you end up saying that, I have the money lying in my bank account and therefore I've done a great job. I think you need to move from saving to investments, because if you start that early, then it's a really, really good habit. And I think anything which gets into becoming a habit over a few months, then just continues with you through your entire career.
Okay. So Vishal, what should the first portfolio look like?
So I think, again, you start off with your goals. You have to be very clear that your goals need to define your investment strategy. It should not be tax planning. It should not be what your friend is doing. It should not be what you've read somewhere saying that this is a place where you can invest in and make maybe great returns. The first place you start off is trying to say, okay, how much do I want to really save? There are lots of very scientific ways to do it. But I think for a lot of people who are starting off, they want to do it in a manner where they use some thumb rules. So for example, there is a 50-30-20 thumb rule, which gets used very often, where you actually use 50% of your income on what you actually need to do or need to spend on. You have another 30% which goes to places which are desires, wants, that sort of space. And then you put the balance 20-30%, which is left over, into investments. Now, once you've done that, your first portfolio needs to be driven once again by the goals that you have. So if you need the money, let's say after a year, because you're only going to take a year before you go to study, and you're going to use this as either the entire fee is going to come out of here, or it's going to become the down payment for an education loan, then you don't want to go into areas like the stock market, because clearly equities are not designed for very short investment horizons. You may deliberately use fixed income sort of instruments, debt mutual funds, bank deposits, those kind of instruments, simply because your goal is dictating your investment strategy. If you're one of those people who are very lucky, you have parents who are already wealthy, this is really your money, you can decide what you want to do with it, then we would strongly suggest that you start saving for your long-term goals right away. Because what you want to do is get to a point where you have financial freedom quickly. And you are then able to make choices in the way that you want, as far as your career is concerned, as far as your work hours are concerned, as far as how you want to deal with family is concerned. All of those choices suddenly become much more open for you once you get closer to financial freedom.
Okay. But Vishal, the second big hurdle that comes is that, you've made your first portfolio, but most people let it be, thinking that, there's barely any increase in salary. So let this portfolio continue as is, right? But is it equally important to, let your investing corpus also keep pace with whatever, your salary has increased by, and how do you do it?
It's absolutely critical. So I think just the way your salary is going up, you also want to ensure that your savings rate goes up. And the best way to do this is to automate it. So effectively, what happens is, let's say your salary goes up by 10%, and you're saving through, let's say, an SIP or a recurring deposit. Try to ensure that a large part of that 10% automatically goes back as a top up in terms of your investment plan. I think there is a tendency to sort of expand your expenses as your income goes up. But I think you need to be measured. Just ensure that at least half of the increase in compensation that has happened actually goes towards increasing your investments, and the other half can go and take care of inflation, plus some lifestyle changes that you might want to consider, but do that very prudently.
Okay. But in most cases, when people are just about getting started in their lives, even if you count only the most important expenses, those expenses keep outweighing whatever is your inflow, right? So you may have clever budgeting, but despite that, most people are just left to play catch up, at least in the first few years, right? How do you sort of reconcile this to a more manageable situation?
So I think a large part of this is, definition of necessity and wants. I think very clearly, across generations, this definition has also changed. And I think it's important to keep in mind that when you are sitting down and doing budgeting, you define what's the necessity for yourself. The necessity, once again, for your friend, for your colleague, may be different. They may be in a different wealth phase. There may be money in the family. There might be a lot of different things that may be happening at the same time. So you need to define what is your list of necessities very clearly. And the only way to define it is actually to sit down and create an Excel sheet or write it down on a piece of paper, saying that for me, this is my necessity and this is how I want to take care of it. It's also important to educate people in your ecosystem, especially your immediate family, who do tend to also have requirements, that what is a necessity and what is a want. I think once you've done that very clearly and everyone's gradually coming around to the same page, I think you start to find it so much easier to make this happen, because you then don't overspend, you invest regularly, and the whole cycle then becomes a very virtuous cycle. And of course, like always, like I mentioned multiple times, ensure that you have goals. The moment you have goals, you have timelines with it, you have amounts for those goals attached to it. And because you have all that in place, it now becomes easier for you to decide that when I'm choosing not to spend that money today, this is the benefit that will come to me at a certain point in time because I have a well-defined goal. And I think that's what really gets people very, very motivated to continue on this journey because they can see the end goal in place and the benefits that could accrue through that process.
Yeah, that's true, actually. And, resurgent India, which is seeing ever expanding middle class, has a lot of rising aspirations. And it's today more important than ever, especially since we've come out after 2 years of a pandemic, to keep those aspirations in check. We, like, Vishal said, we must be very, very certain between wants and needs. We're going to take a very quick break. But on the other side, we're going to have, more aspects to this conversation. What about if you have irregular income, if you're in a startup, or, for example, you want to retire early? Can you plan for it already? All of that is lined up next. Stay tuned.